They gripped the disabled woman's wheelchair, making her watch as they cruelly stomped on her faithful service dog. The dog, who knew her every unspoken sorrow, could only whimper in agony. The men jeered, certain their wealth could absolve them of any transgression. But they hadn't planned on the one man jogging through the park, a man who happened to be a Marine raider. And he was about to serve a kind of justice they would never forget. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story moves you, please subscribe for more. The evening air in Charleston, South Carolina doesn't just settle on you, it clings. A warm, salty veil woven from the sea, colonial history, and the sweet, heavy scent of magnolias and marsh water. It was 6 in the evening, and the city's famed waterfront park was bathed in a soft, peach-colored light. Palmetto trees stood like sentinels against the harbor, their fronds rustling in the gentle breeze, casting long shadows across the wide brick promenades. Clara Evans felt the humid warmth on her skin as she worked. She was set up near the pineapple fountain, her sculptor's tools laid out on a custom tray attached to her wheelchair. In front of her, a stand held an armature, the wire skeleton of the human form she was shaping from a block of clay. Clara, a woman in her late 20s with sharp, focused green eyes and auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail to fight the humidity, was a sculptor. Her work was starting to make waves in the local arts scene, praised for capturing the raw, dynamic energy of the human body. Her paralysis, the result of a rock-climbing fall 3 years ago, had taken the use of her legs, but it had given her hands an even deeper understanding of form and strength. Her wheelchair, a sleek, modern extension of her own will, was simply how she navigated her world. Beside her, lying watchful but relaxed on the manicured lawn, was Echo. He was a striking Belgian Malinois, his fawn and black coat shining in the sunset. He was more than a pet. He was her highly trained service animal, her constant grounding presence. His official vest was off, letting him rest, but his senses were always on high alert. He watched the tourists, the couples strolling hand in hand, and the gulls, his ears twitching. But he remained attuned to Clara's emotional state, a silent protector. She paused her work, reaching down to stroke the powerful muscle of his shoulder. "Even the ghosts are sweating tonight, huh, boy?" she said softly. Echo thumped his tail once on the grass, a quiet agreement. It was a tranquil evening, the kind of deep quiet that let her creativity breathe, the sounds of distant harbor bells muffled by the park's lush greenery. The peace was shattered, not slowly, but all at once by the aggressive, throaty growl of a souped-up engine. A crimson sports car, far too flashy and loud for these cobblestone streets, screeched to a stop on the road bordering the park, its tires protesting against the pavement. The bass from its stereo was a physical throb against the quiet air. 3 young men tumbled out, their laughter harsh and loud. They were cut from the same cloth. Crisp linen shirts, sockless loafers, and designer sunglasses that cost more than Clara's monthly studio rent. The one who climbed out of the driver's seat was the obvious ringleader. This was Julian Croft. He was handsome, with dark, perfectly styled hair, and the smug, effortless confidence of a man who had never been denied anything. His family's name was carved onto half the historic buildings in the city, an empire built on old textile money and banking, and he walked as if he owned the air he breathed. At his sides were Mason Thorne, burly and red-faced, and Kyle Baxter, wiry and twitchy. Both served as their leaders' sycophants and enforcers. They were bored, rich, and searching for an amusement. Their eyes swept the park and fell upon the most convenient target, the woman in the wheelchair and her dog. They started walking over, their voices loud. "Check out the dog," Julian said, loud enough for Clara to hear. "Bet it's some kind of guard dog." Mason snickered, picking up a fallen palmetto frond and flicking it toward Echo. "Go get it, boy. Fetch." Echo ignored the frond. He didn't move, but his muscles coiled. He rose from his resting position to a seated one, positioning himself squarely between Clara's wheelchair and the approaching men. His stance wasn't aggressive, but protective. A living barrier. Clara sighed, her concentration shattered, her hand clenching a wire tool. "He's a service animal," she called out, her voice steady and clear. "He's on duty. Please leave him be." She despised confrontation, but she despised the casual arrogance of men like this even more. Her words seemed to entertain them. "Oh, a service animal," Julian mocked, making air quotes. He stepped closer, invading Clara's personal space. Echo didn't growl, but a low rumble vibrated in his chest. "Looks mean," Kyle said, hanging back a few feet. "He's not mean," Clara said, looking directly at Julian, her eyes meeting his shielded gaze. "He's disciplined. Now please leave. You're disturbing us." For a second, Julian Croft III just stared at her. It was a look of utter disbelief. He, the scion of the Croft dynasty, was being told what to do by her. A woman in a chair. The smirk fell from his face, replaced by a sudden, icy flash of rage. His ego, both massive and brittle, had been dented. "What did you say to me?" he asked, his voice low. "I said leave," Clara repeated, refusing to break eye contact. That was her mistake. She had challenged him. She had not shown the deference he expected. "You don't tell me what to do," Julian sneered. He took a swig from a silver flask he'd pulled from his pocket, the scent of expensive bourbon sharp on the sea air. He then casually flicked the flask's metal cap, striking Echo squarely on the muzzle. Echo yelped, a short, sharp sound of surprise and pain, shaking his head. That was it. "Stop it!" Clara shouted, her voice ringing out. "Get away from him!" Julian smiled. It was a cold, thin-lipped expression. "You hear that, boys?" he said to his friends. "She wants us to leave." He looked back at Clara, his eyes glinting. "But I don't think we're going to. I think you need to learn some respect." He nodded to his friends. "Hold her." Mason and Kyle hesitated for a beat. This wasn't what they'd planned, but a venomous glare from Julian sent them into action. Before Clara could react, they were on either side of her. Mason grabbed the push handle on her left side, and Kyle grabbed the right, locking the chair in place. "Don't touch me!" Clara yelled, a spike of panic in her chest. She pushed against the wheels, but the chair was held firm. "Let go of my chair!" Echo, seeing his handler restrained and sensing her terror, finally broke his calm demeanor. He lunged, barking, a deep, resonant roar aimed at Mason, but he never reached him. Julian was quicker. With a vicious, deliberate motion, he kicked. His loafer connected with Echo's ribs with a sickening thud. The dog let out a choked cry, crumpling to the grass. The air knocked from his lungs. "No!" Clara screamed, surging forward, but the chair held her fast. Julian stepped over to her, his shadow falling across her clay figure. He grabbed a handful of her hair, yanking her head back and forcing her to look at him. "You shut your mouth," he hissed, the bourbon on his breath turning her stomach. And then, with an open hand, he slapped her hard across the face. The crack was shockingly loud in the quiet park. Clara's head snapped to the side, her cheek erupting in pain, tears flooding her eyes more from the shock and humiliation than the sting itself. She was trapped, completely helpless. "Now," Julian whispered, his voice dangerously soft as he held her hair, forcing her head to turn toward the dog. Echo was struggling to his feet, wheezing, his eyes locked on Clara. "You're going to sit right there, and you're going to watch. You're going to watch while we teach this mutt what happens when it barks at me." He released her hair with a shove. He turned to Kyle. "Kick him." Kyle looked queasy, but he didn't dare say no. As Clara watched in frozen horror, Unable to move, unable to scream, held fast by the hands on her chair, Julian and Kyle advanced on the wounded Malinois. The first stomp landed, and Clara finally found her voice. It wasn't a word, just a raw, piercing cry of anguish that echoed uselessly across the harbor, under the indifferent palmetto trees. 200 yards away, on the park's jogging path along the seawall, Alex Renner was finishing the last mile of his run. He was a man made of lean muscle and quiet intensity, moving with a powerful, ground-eating stride that spoke of incredible stamina. His face was sharp, his eyes a deep, focused blue, and his short-cut dark hair was damp with sweat. Alex was an active-duty Marine raider, home in Charleston on a brief, mandatory leave to decompress after an operation he was actively trying to forget. He ran without earbuds, a habit forged by his profession. Situational awareness was survival, even stateside. The park's ambient noise was a familiar cadence. Distant foghorns, the laughter of tourists, the rustle of the breeze. He was filtering it all out, concentrating on his breathing, until two sounds cut through the ordinary. The first was the sharp, agonized yelp of a dog. The second, a split second later, was a woman's scream. Not a playful shriek, but a raw, desperate cry of pure terror. Alex's body reacted before his mind had finished processing. His stride didn't falter. His vector simply changed. He pivoted on the ball of his foot, clearing a low garden wall and cutting across the open lawn, his eyes scanning, acquiring targets. The scene registered in a cold, tactical assessment. One woman in a wheelchair, restrained by two men, a third man, the leader, standing over her. The same man and another kicking a dog on the ground. 3 hostiles, 1 primary victim, 1 secondary. His pace increased, but it was a controlled, silent surge, his feet barely whispering on the grass. He was a phantom gliding through the fading sunlight. He did not yell a warning. A warning was a gift you gave to someone you didn't see as an immediate threat. These men were not that. Mason Thorne, the burly one holding the left side of Clara's chair, was laughing at the dog's whimpers when he felt a sudden, explosive pressure on his neck. An arm, as hard as a steel bar, had locked around his throat from behind. He didn't even have time to register surprise. His hands flew up, scrabbling uselessly at the forearm, cutting off his air, his vision tunneling to a single point of light. Alex applied the blood choke with practiced, lethal efficiency. He held it for exactly 2 seconds until Mason's body went limp, then released him, letting the man crumple to the grass like a dropped sandbag. He had made no sound. The entire takedown was silent. Julian and Kyle were still focused on Echo, lost in their own power trip. Kyle, the wiry one, was pulling his foot back for another stomp when a flicker of movement, the shadow of Mason collapsing, made him turn. He saw a shape, a new man, and his eyes widened in confusion. That confusion was all the time Alex needed. Alex didn't waste motion on a punch. He took 1 step to close the distance and delivered a driving palm heel strike directly to Kyle's solar plexus. The impact was a dull, heavy thud. All the air in Kyle's lungs vanished in a single, silent gasp. His eyes bulged and he folded in half, clutching his stomach as he fell to his knees, unable to breathe, unable to move. 2 threats, neutralized in under 5 seconds. Now there was only one. Julian Croft spun around, his cruel smile dissolving into a slack-jawed expression of pure shock. His 2 friends were on the ground. Standing between him and them was a man unlike anyone he had ever faced. This wasn't some tourist or an angry local. This was something else entirely. Alex was breathing calmly, not even winded from his run. He was covered in sweat, his muscles defined, and his blue eyes were completely flat, devoid of any emotion Julian could name, except for a cold, terrifying focus. Julian's mind, which usually moved so quickly when he was in charge, simply froze. He saw his escape route, the car, and he saw the man blocking it. He raised his hands, a weak, reflexive gesture of surrender. "Hey, man," he stammered, his voice thin. We were just... It was a joke. We were just joking." Alex took one slow, deliberate step toward him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The sudden quiet of the park seemed to amplify his words, making them hang in the humid air. "You joked," Alex stated, his voice a low, gravelly monotone that was more frightening than any shout. Julian flinched, his bravado vanishing so completely it was as if it had never been there. He was a child, small and scared, facing a true predator. He started to back away, tripping over his own expensive shoes. I'm sorry," he whispered, a word he had likely never meant before. "We'll go. We're going." Alex stopped, letting him keep the distance. He looked from Julian to the whimpering dog, then to the woman in the chair who was staring at him, her hand over her mouth, her face stained with tears and a bright red mark on her cheek. His gaze snapped back to Julian, and the cold focus ignited into a flicker of pure, controlled hatred. Julian physically recoiled from the look. "Get him," Alex ordered, nodding at the gasping Kyle. "And him," he indicated the unconscious Mason. "Get them out of here." Julian, desperate to obey, scrambled to pull Kyle to his feet. Kyle was still wheezing, snot and tears streaming down his face as he tried to stand. "Now," Alex said, his voice dropping even lower. Julian and Kyle, clumsy with fear, half-dragged, half-carried Mason's dead weight across the lawn toward the sports car. They shoved him into the back seat, scrambled into the front, and fumbled with the ignition. Julian looked back one last time, his face pale with terror. Alex was still standing there, watching him. He hadn't moved. The engine roared to life, and the car peeled out, tires squealing in protest, leaving the scent of burnt rubber and expensive cologne hanging in the heavy Charleston air. The park was suddenly, violently quiet. The only sounds were Clara's ragged, choked sobs and the high-pitched, painful whining of Echo, who was trying to drag himself toward her. Alex stood for a moment, his fists slowly unclenching, his breathing steady. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind the familiar hollow ache. He turned, the lethal presence vanishing, and his full attention settled on Clara and her dog. The scream of the sports car's tires faded, leaving a ringing silence in Waterfront Park. The air, which moments before had been charged with violence and terror, now felt heavy and thick with the aftermath. Clara Evans was trembling so violently her wheelchair shook, her breaths coming in short, hiccuping sobs. The bright red mark on her cheek throbbed in time with her racing heart. Echo, her brave, injured dog, was whining, a high-pitched, agonizing sound as he tried to crawl the last few feet to her, his back legs seeming to drag. She was frozen, her mind unable to reconcile the horror of the attack with this sudden, shocking silence. The man who had saved them was still standing where the car had been, his back to her. He was a statue of coiled power, his hands still clenched, his shoulders broad and tight. Clara watched him, afraid of him too. He had materialized like a phantom and had dismantled 3 men with a speed and efficiency that felt otherworldly. Then he moved. Clara flinched, but he didn't turn toward her. Not yet. He rolled his shoulders, a single deliberate motion. His head dropped, and he took one long, deep breath, his entire body seeming to decompress, the deadly tension draining out of him. His clenched hands slowly uncurled. When he finally turned, the man who faced her was not the same one who had confronted Julian. The flat, cold killer's eyes were gone. In their place was a look of deep, piercing concern, a focused stillness that was just as intense but entirely different. He walked toward her, his movements measured, his eyes shifting between her and the whimpering dog. He stopped a few feet away, careful not to invade her space, his gaze settling on Echo. "Is he friendly?" His voice was low and calm, a different timbre from the gravelly command that had terrified Julian. It was a voice, she thought, that was used to being obeyed, a voice that calmed. Clara could only nod, unable to find her own words. He gave her a single nod of understanding and moved past her to the dog. He didn't just kneel. He dropped into a practiced one-knee crouch, his hands hovering over Echo's body before making contact. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "Easy now, let me check you out." Echo, who would normally be wary of a strange man, seemed to sense the confidence in his touch. He whined, but he allowed the examination, his tail giving a single pathetic thump. Clara watched, mesmerized by the contradiction. The hands that had moved with blinding, brutal speed were now impossibly gentle. His fingers, calloused and sure, probed Echo's ribs, his head, his legs with the light, practiced touch of a medic. On his running belt, Clara now noticed a small, black, zippered pouch. He unzipped it, revealing a tightly packed individual first aid kit. It was not a standard runner's kit. It looked professional, military grade. "Well," Alex said, his voice calm. "He's got at least 2 broken ribs, maybe 3. You did good, boy. You took the hits." He pulled out a roll of self-adhering compression bandage. "He needs an emergency vet now, but this will stabilize the ribs for the ride so he can breathe easier." As Clara watched him work, his movements efficient and certain, her shock began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of whiplash. This man was a living paradox. He was a storm of violence one moment and a gentle healer the next. He had saved them. He had saved Echo. The tears that had been frozen by fear began to flow again, this time from a well of gratitude so deep it ached. "Thank you," she finally whispered, her voice raw and broken. They were..." Alex didn't look up from his work, keeping his focus on the dog. "I know," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Just breathe. He's okay. You're okay. They're gone." He finished wrapping Echo's torso, securing the bandage with a practiced tear. He gave the dog one last reassuring pat on the head before standing. Now his full attention was on her. He crouched in front of her wheelchair, bringing himself down to her eye level. His blue eyes scanned her face, and his expression hardened as he focused on the bright red handprint on her cheek. He didn't reach out to touch it, for which she was grateful. She felt like she might fly apart, but his proximity was intense, focused. "He hit you," he stated. It wasn't a question. The coldness she'd seen earlier flickered back into his eyes, a dangerous spark in the depths. "Are you hurt anywhere else? Did they do anything else?" Clara shook her head, pulling the tattered remains of her composure around her. "No, just that. He held my hair. I'm okay." He nodded slowly, accepting her answer, though his jaw remained tight. "Good." He stood up, his gaze sweeping the area. Her sketchbook was on the ground, open, its pages smudged. Her sculpting tools were scattered. "Where's your vehicle?" The gray van," she pointed, her hand trembling. "Over on East Bay Street. It has a ramp." He nodded. "Stay here." He moved with purpose, gathering her armature and stand, her tools, her scattered supplies, folding the legs and securing her work tray. He did it with a neatness that suggested practice. He packed her art bag, his movements showing no awkwardness, and hung it from the back of her chair. Then he returned to Echo. "Okay, boy," he said softly. "Time for a ride." With one smooth, powerful motion, Alex scooped the 70-pound Belgian Malinois into his arms. He lifted him as if he weighed nothing, cradling him against his chest. Echo yelped once, then settled, seeming to understand he was being rescued. "Lead the way," Alex said to Clara. She pushed the wheels of her chair, her arms aching, her mind numb, leading her savior, who was carrying her other savior, to the van. He waited patiently as she used her remote to unlock the doors and deploy the side ramp. He watched her guide the chair up and lock it into the driver's position, his expression unreadable. Once she was secure, he stepped into the van, moving past her to the open space in the back. He gently laid Echo on a blanket she kept there. "He'll be okay for the ride," he said. He stepped back out, standing on the sidewalk as she swiveled her chair to face him. The moment hung between them. I don't know who you are," she said, her voice small, "or how I can ever—" He cut her off, not unkindly. He was already pulling a small waterproof notepad and a pen from his pouch. He tore out a page and scribbled a number on it. "Get him to an emergency vet now," he said. The gentleness was gone, replaced by a tone of command, but it felt protective, not hostile. He handed her the small, damp piece of paper. "My name is Alex. I'm in town for 2 more weeks. That's my number." He locked his gaze with hers. "If you have any more trouble from them, even if they just drive by, or for any other reason, you call me. Day or night, it doesn't matter. Do you understand?" Clara looked from the number written in strong, blocky print to his face. His blue eyes weren't cold, and they weren't warm. They were just steady, present. He was seeing her, not her chair, not her tears, just her. And in his eyes, she saw a profound, unspoken understanding. He had seen the world's ugliness, and he had chosen to stand against it. She clutched the paper. "Yes," she whispered. "I understand." He nodded once, a sharp, definite movement. "Be safe, Clara." He knew her name. He must have seen it on her sketchbook. He stepped back from the van. Clara hit the button to close the ramp and the door, her hand shaking. She started the engine, her eyes meeting his one last time through the window before she pulled away from the curb. Alex Renner stood on the sidewalk, a solitary figure in the humid Charleston twilight, watching until the gray van disappeared around the corner. The drive to the Charleston Emergency Vet Clinic was a blur of adrenaline and muffled sobs. Clara's hands were slick with sweat on the specialized hand controls of her van, her cheek throbbing, her mind replaying the sickening impact of the kicks landing on Echo's body. Alex's makeshift compression wrap was a stark white against her dog's dark fur in the rearview mirror. Echo himself was quiet. Too quiet. His breathing shallow. And that silence terrified her more than his whining had. She clutched the small, damp piece of paper with Alex's number in her hand, the ink already blurring slightly. It felt like the only solid thing in a world that had just tilted off its axis. She pulled into the emergency bay, deploying her ramp and rushing inside, her wheels squeaking on the linoleum as she pushed Echo's gurney, which a technician had thankfully brought out to the van. They were met by Dr. Ben Carter, a tall, kind-eyed man in his 40s with a calming presence and gentle hands. He had a way of speaking to both animals and their humans with the same level of respect. "Let's get him in the back, Clara." "What happened here?" he asked, his eyes immediately assessing the dog's condition and catching the severe, fresh bruise blooming on Clara's own face. Clara stammered out a disjointed version of the events. "He was attacked, kicked, in the park by some men." Dr. Carter's expression tightened, but he nodded, his professionalism taking over. "We'll take good care of him. Let us get some x-rays and check for internal bleeding. Our tech will be out to get your statement." Clara was left in the sterile, fluorescent-lit waiting room, the antiseptic smell doing nothing to calm her nerves. An hour later, Dr. Carter returned, his face grave. "Well, your friend in the park was spot on," he said, holding up an X-ray film to the light. 3 broken ribs, right here, here, and here. Severe deep tissue bruising across his back and abdomen. No internal bleeding, thank goodness. He's a very tough, very lucky dog." He paused, his gaze softening. "And what about you? That looks incredibly painful." Clara just shook her head, the tears she'd been holding back spilling over. They held my chair while they did it," she whispered. "They made me watch." Dr. Carter's jaw clenched. "Clara, I have to ask, do you know who did this? You need to go to the police." The anger, which had been smothered by fear, finally began to burn. He was right. She wasn't just a victim. She was a witness. She had a license plate number. She paid the exorbitant vet bill, arranged for Echo to be kept overnight for observation, and drove her van straight to the main precinct of the Charleston Police Department. The building felt old, smelling of stale coffee and bureaucracy. She rolled up to the high desk, finding herself looking up at a man who seemed molded from the chair he sat in. This was Sergeant Davis, the desk sergeant. He was a middle-aged man with a rumpled uniform, a weary face, and a gaze that suggested he had seen everything and was impressed by none of it. "Help you?" he asked, not looking up from his computer screen. Clara took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice even. "I need to report an assault," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "On myself and on my service animal, and on my—" That got his attention, barely. He sighed, pulling a form toward him. "All right, name?" She gave him her information. "And what happened?" Clara recounted the story for the 3rd time, her voice gaining a sharp, angry edge as she detailed the events. She described Julian, Mason, and Kyle. She described the taunts, the flick of the flask cap that hit Echo, the way they held her chair, the slap to her face, and the repeated vicious kicks to her dog. She was clear and precise. Sergeant Davis typed, his expression one of pure, dispassionate boredom. "And you say they were in a crimson sports car?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said, feeling a small surge of triumph. "And I got the license plate." She read the numbers clearly from a note she'd scribbled at the vet. Davis typed them into the system. And just like that, everything changed. Davis stopped typing. He visibly stiffened, his bored demeanor vanishing. He read the screen, his lips pursed, then slowly leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing at Clara. It was a new look, one of suspicion, of appraisal. "A crimson sports car, you said, belonging to Julian Croft III. He said the name as if it were a full sentence, an explanation and a dismissal all in one. "That's a pretty serious accusation to make against a family like that, ma'am." Clara was stunned by the shift. "It's not an accusation," she said, her grip tightening on her wheels. "It's what happened. He slapped me. He kicked my dog." Sergeant Davis laced his fingers over his stomach, his gaze turning cold. "Look, Miss Evans, the Crofts are important people in this city. You're sure you didn't provoke them in some way? Maybe your dog was aggressive? They're going to say your dog was aggressive, a big Malinois like that." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "He's a service animal. They provoked him. They held my chair." Davis just shook his head slowly, a pitying, patronizing look on his face. "You have to understand how this looks. A girl like you picking a fight with the Croft heir?" "A girl like me?" Clara repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "You mean a girl in a wheelchair?" He raised his hands. "I'm just saying, it's your word against his, and his word carries a lot of weight in Charleston." He finished typing something, hit enter with a decisive thack, and closed the report. "I've filed it," he said, his tone final. "We'll look into it." But his eyes said it all. The report was a formality, destined for a digital grave. She was being dismissed. Power had spoken before she had even been allowed to. Clara sat in silence for a long moment, the injustice of it a physical weight in her chest. She turned her wheelchair and rolled out of the precinct without another word, the faint sound of Davis already answering the next phone call behind her. She drove home to her small studio apartment, a converted warehouse loft downtown that she loved. Her refuge. Now it felt cold. She was exhausted, bruised, and felt utterly, completely powerless. Echo was at the vet, her face throbbed, and the men who did this were probably at a bar laughing about it. Her sanctuary, her studio, was filled with her sculptures, dynamic figures that captured the spirit of Charleston. But the joy was gone. She was staring at a half-finished piece, a depiction of a graceful dancer, when her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed again, persistently. She answered, her voice tired. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Am I speaking with Ms. Clara Evans?" "Yes," she said. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I am legal counsel for the Croft family. It has come to our attention that you had an unfortunate encounter with Julian Croft this afternoon." Clara sat up, her heart hammering. "An unfortunate encounter? He assaulted me. He nearly killed my dog." Thorne's voice didn't change, remaining placid and reasonable. "Yes, a terrible misunderstanding. Julian feels awful about the whole thing. He's a young man, very passionate, and he was under the impression your dog was lunging at him. He acted in self-defense. As for the situation with you, he merely brushed past you in his haste to defend himself." The audacity of the lie took her breath away. "That is not what happened. I went to the police. I filed a report." There was a soft, almost amused chuckle on the other end. "Ah, yes, the report. Which brings me to the point of my call, Ms. Evans. The Crofts are generous people. They are fully prepared to cover all of Mr. Echo's veterinary expenses, no questions asked. A sign of goodwill." A pause. "In exchange for your signature on a simple non-disclosure agreement. Of course, we wouldn't want this misunderstanding to be misinterpreted by the public." Clara felt a cold dread settle over her. "And if I don't sign? If I tell people what really happened?" The lawyer's voice lost its manufactured warmth, becoming as hard and cold as marble. "Then we will have a problem. The Crofts will, of course, be forced to protect their good name. We would file a countersuit against you for slander and harassment. Mr. Croft has 2 witnesses who will testify that your dog attacked them unprovoked and that you were verbally abusive." "That's a lie!" Clara shouted. "Furthermore," Thorne continued as if she hadn't spoken, "I took the liberty of looking into your studio lease, a wonderful space. Your landlord, Mr. Henderson, does a great deal of business with the Croft banking interests. It would be a tragedy if this misunderstanding were to jeopardize that relationship. I'm sure Mr. Henderson would be forced to terminate your lease immediately." The threat hung in the air, complete and suffocating. It was brilliant. It was evil. They would take her dog, her name, and her art. Clara was trembling, speechless. "I will have a courier send the agreement to your studio in the morning, Ms. Evans. You are a smart woman. I trust you will make the smart decision." The line clicked dead. Clara sat in the silence, her world reduced to the 4 walls of her studio. They had her. They had won. Her eyes fell on the small, damp piece of paper on her workbench, a phone number. "If you have any more trouble, you call me." She wasn't just in trouble. She was trapped. Her hand, shaking, reached for the phone. Clara's hand was shaking so violently she could barely hold the phone, let alone tap the screen. The lawyer's voice, a smooth, venomous whisper, echoed in the silence of her studio. "Terminate your lease." He had threatened her art. He had threatened her home. He had threatened the one thing she had built for herself after the accident. The police wouldn't help. The law was already bought. She was completely, utterly alone, and the walls of her refuge suddenly felt like the walls of a trap. Her eyes landed on the damp, crumpled piece of paper Alex had given her. "If you have any more trouble, you call me." This was more than trouble. This was annihilation. She wasn't calling him to be her savior. She didn't even know him. She was calling him because he was the only other person on Earth who had seen what really happened in that park. She was calling him to hear a single voice that believed her before the darkness swallowed her whole. She pressed the number. It rang twice, a sharp electronic sound that seemed too loud in the quiet room. "Yeah." His voice was instant, sharp and alert. Not a hello, but an acknowledgement. "Alex, this is Clara from the park, with the dog." She cringed at how small and broken her voice sounded. "I am so sorry to bother you. I know you said to call, but I didn't know who else." A sob she'd been fighting back finally broke free, thick and ragged. "Hey." His voice changed instantly. The sharp edge was gone, replaced by a low, calm focus. "Breathe. Talk to me. Are you hurt? Are they there?" No, she stammered, trying to get air. "It was a lawyer for that man, Croft. He called me. He said they'd pay for Echo, but I have to sign something, and if I don't, he said they'd sue me. He said my dog attacked them. He said they'd take my studio. They'll have me evicted." She was crying openly now, the humiliation and the helplessness overwhelming her. "He knew my landlord's name, Alex. He knew. How did he—" There was a second of pure, cold silence on the other end. When Alex spoke again, his voice was different. It was flat, calm, and absolutely terrifying. It was the voice he had used on Julian. "Where are you right now?" "My studio, my apartment," she whispered. "Are you on the ground floor?" "Second floor, above a gallery." "Is your door locked?" Yes, it's locked." "Good, stay there. Don't answer it for anyone but me. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He didn't say goodbye. The line simply clicked dead. The suddenness of it, the absolute certainty in his command, cut through her panic. It was a lifeline. For 10 minutes, she sat perfectly still, listening to every creak in the old building, her heart pounding. Exactly 10 minutes later, there was a quiet, specific knock on her door. Not a police knock, not a social knock, just tap, tap, tap. She rolled her chair over, her hands slick on the wheels, and looked through the peephole. It was him. She unlocked the 3 locks she always fastened and pulled the door open. He was no longer the sweaty jogger. He'd showered and changed. He wore simple jeans and a dark blue t-shirt that stretched across his shoulders and chest, and he was carrying a small black, nondescript backpack. He didn't smile. He didn't offer words of comfort. His blue eyes met hers for 1 second, taking in her tear-streaked face and the red mark, which had now deepened to a dark, angry purple. Then his gaze swept past her into her studio, scanning the room in a single, comprehensive glance. "I'm sorry," she started. "Let me see the room," he said, stepping inside. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked the perimeter of her large, open-plan studio. It was one big room with a kitchenette in one corner, a bed in another, and the rest dominated by sculptures, stands, and the wonderful, earthy smell of clay and damp plaster. He went to the front windows first, the large, beautiful arched windows that overlooked the street. "Fire escape," he noted, touching the latch. "Old, easy to bypass." He moved to her front door. He examined the frame, the deadbolts. Good locks, he conceded, but the frame is old wood. A solid kick would splinter it. He unzipped his backpack. Clara watched, baffled, as he pulled out a small gray plastic device, a roll of what looked like heavy-duty gray tape, and some thin, high-tensile wire. "This is military-grade tape," he said, his voice matter-of-fact as he worked. "It sticks to anything." He taped the small device, which she now saw was a personal shriek alarm, to the wall beside her door. He then unspooled a short length of wire, attaching one end to the alarms pin and the other to the edge of the door. The wire stretched taut when the door was closed. "If anyone jimmies that lock and opens this door more than an inch," he said, "it pulls the pin. This thing puts out 130 decibels. It'll wake the dead and it'll wake you." He did the same for the main window, creating a simple invisible tripwire. When he was finished, he stood in the center of the room. He seemed to listen, not with his ears, but with his whole body. "It's secure," he said, "for now." Only then did he finally turn and look at her. He saw the terror that was still vibrating behind her eyes. He saw the exhaustion, and he saw that she hadn't eaten. "Where's the nearest good pizza place?" he asked. The question was so absurd, so normal, it took her a second to process. "What?" "Food," he said, pulling out his phone. "You need to eat. Pizza or Chinese?" There's a pizza place on Broad. It's good." He found it on his phone, placed an order for 2, and gave them her address. 20 minutes, he said, putting the phone away. The crisis was over. The immediate threat was contained, and now there was only the quiet, awkward space between two strangers bound by a moment of violence. He didn't sit, but walked over to her sculptures, his hands clasped behind his back. He studied her work, the dynamic, powerful figures, the moody, expressive busts. "This is yours," he said, pointing to a large clay model of a soaring eagle. "It's good, really good. It's all I have," she whispered, the tears threatening again. "That lawyer, he knows this. He knows it's my life. He threatened to take it away." "He won't," Alex said. It was a simple statement of fact. They were quiet until the food arrived. Alex paid the delivery driver, his body angled protectively in the doorway, and brought the pizza box to her small kitchen table. He found plates, found napkins, and served the slices. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the simple human act of sharing a meal slowly chipping away at the tension. "Why are you doing this, Alex?" she finally asked, setting her crust down. "You don't know me. You were terrifying in the park. You saved me. You didn't have to come here. Why?" He was quiet for a long time, staring into his plate as if gathering his thoughts. "When I was in the park," he said, his voice low, "I saw that man's face. Julian. He was enjoying it. He loved that you were trapped. He loved that he was hurting something that couldn't fight back." He looked up, and his blue eyes were haunted. "I grew up in a place where I saw that look a lot. Big men, small men, people who like to break things just to watch them shatter. People who use their power not to build anything but just to hurt." He looked down at his own hands, calloused and scarred. "I hated that look. I hated that feeling of helplessness. I decided a long time ago that I was going to be the man who stood on the other side of that. That's all. I don't like bullies." It was the simplest, most honest explanation she had ever heard. It wasn't a boast. It was a code. "And the accident?" he asked, his voice gentle, changing the subject, but his eyes told her he already knew. "Distracted driver," she said, her voice flat. "Crossed the center line. I used to be a climber. Professional rock climber." She looked at her legs hidden under the table. The sculpting. This was what I had left. This is how I learned to be in the world again. If they take this, they won't, he said again. It was a simple statement, a fact. He wasn't promising. He was telling her. The silence that fell between them this time was different. It wasn't empty or awkward. It was full. Clara looked at this man, this stranger who had set up alarms in her house and was sharing cheap pizza with her, and she realized that for the first time since the lawyer's call, no, for the first time since the accident, she wasn't afraid. Her heart wasn't pounding. She felt safe. And Alex looked at her strength, at the stubborn fire behind her eyes, at the purple bruise on her face, and he realized with a sudden jarring clarity that this was no longer about a random act of intervention. This wasn't a mission. It was personal. Julian Croft III was not accustomed to fear. He was accustomed to anger, boredom, and a baseline level of casual contempt for the world he moved through. But the cold, emotionless blue eyes of the man in the park had introduced him to a new, sickening sensation. True terror. That terror, having marinated for 12 hours, had soured into a deep, festering humiliation. He wasn't just embarrassed. He'd been made to look weak in front of Mason and Kyle. And worse, his father had found out. He wasn't summoned to the family's sprawling estate on the Battery. Instead, he was called to the downtown office of Marcus Thorne, the Croft family's legal counsel. The office was a sterile glass and steel box high above the Charleston harbor, a place where problems were not solved, but surgically erased. Marcus Thorne, a man in his 50s with a perfectly tailored suit and eyes as colorless as polished granite, was the family's scalpel. It was not the act, Julian, but the execution, Thorne said, his voice a calm, smooth monotone as he stared out the window. Your father is displeased, not by your choice of entertainment, but by your sloppiness. You were seen. You were recorded by bystanders. And most significantly, you chose to engage with a man who our sources confirm is an active-duty Marine Special Operations operator. Thorne turned, his face a mask of disappointment. You brought a tantrum to a gunfight, Julian. It was common. Julian slumped in a leather chair that cost more than a car, felt his face burn. He put his hands on me. He embarrassed me. He neutralized you, Thorne corrected, his voice cutting. He neutralized your friends, and he neutralized you without leaving a mark that would hold up in court. And now the woman has filed a police report. Julian sat up, his own anger overriding his fear. So fix it. You fixed the cop. You called her. Now fix him. Thorne almost smiled. A man like Alex Renner cannot be fixed with a phone call. He is not a local policeman or a weak-willed landlord. He is a state-sponsored asset. We cannot touch him directly. The woman, however, a predatory light entered Thorne's eyes. She rejected my generous offer. This makes her a problem your father agrees must be handled. He steepled his fingers. You are angry. You wish to send a message. Fine. This is an opportunity to be strategic, to send a message that both you and I need to be delivered. He leaned forward. She has a temporary weakness. Her dog is at the veterinary clinic being kept for observation. She is alone. He slid a key card across the desk. Mr. Henderson, her landlord, has been reminded of his long and fruitful relationship with the Croft Corporation. He understands that for the next 24 hours, the alley service door to his building may have a faulty lock. What about her? Julian asked, a cruel excitement building. She has to leave sometime, Thorne said. Go. Take your friends. Be quick. Be quiet. And this time, Julian, try not to be an idiot. The next morning, Clara felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in days. Normalcy. She had spoken to Alex on the phone, a brief, reassuring call. He had checked on her, his voice calm and steady. The simple tripwires he'd installed on her door and fire escape window gave her a fragile sense of security. Echo was recovering well. Dr. Carter said she could pick him up in the afternoon. But she was out of everything. No coffee, no food. She couldn't stay locked in her studio forever. She checked the alley from her window. It was empty. She checked the street. Quiet. It was just a simple trip to the grocery store 2 blocks away. She double-locked her door, the thin wire of Alex's alarm looking reassuringly taut. She would be back in 20 minutes. The moment her wheelchair rounded the corner onto Broad Street, a black SUV with tinted windows parked half a block down. Julian, Mason, and Kyle got out. Julian was vibrating with a manic, giddy energy. "Okay," he hissed. "Mason, you watch the street. Kyle, you're with me." Thorne said, "The alley door." They moved quickly, slipping into the narrow alleyway behind the building. They found the heavy steel service door. Julian tried the handle. It was locked. But the keycard Thorne had given him, a master for the building, slid into the reader. A quiet click echoed in the alley. They were in. They weren't in her studio. Not yet. They were in a dark, musty service hallway. Julian led the way, climbing the stairs to the second-floor landing. He grinned. The landlord said her studio has a secondary entrance, a small door from the main hall. It's how they move furniture. It's not her main door. He jiggled the handle of the plain, unmarked wooden door. It was locked, but with a simple, standard lock. Kyle, using a credit card, jimmied it open in seconds. Alex's alarms were on the other side of the studio, at the main entrance and window. They had bypassed his security completely. They stepped inside. The studio was filled with light, color, and the clean, earthy smell of her life. Sculptures were everywhere. Julian's smile was predatory. "Wow," Kyle whispered, looking at a huge, stunning sculpture of a leaping dolphin. She's actually good." "She's trash," Julian spat, his humiliation returning. "She's nothing." He walked over to the sculpture Kyle admired, and with a sudden, violent motion shoved it off its pedestal. The sound of the heavy clay figure shattering on the concrete floor was loud and final. That one act broke the dam. Kyle and Mason, who had crept in, stared in shock. Then a nervous, ugly energy took over. It was a frenzy. They didn't just break things, they violated them. Mason grabbed a heavy mallet from Clara's workbench and began smashing the delicate armatures. Kyle, seeing buckets of wet plaster, laughed and began slinging it against the walls, creating grotesque, dripping patterns of white on the exposed brick. Julian himself went for the finished pieces, the ones ready for a gallery show. He found a chisel, one Clara used for fine detail, and began gouging. The face of a serene old man, a work of profound peace, was obliterated. The dynamic figure of a ballet dancer was hacked into pieces. It was over in 3 minutes. The room was a hurricane of destruction, a maelstrom of overturned plaster, shattered wood, and ruined dreams. "Okay," Kyle panted, his adrenaline fading, replaced by fear. "Okay, Jules, let's go. We did it. Let's go." "Wait," Julian said. His eyes were wide, gleaming. He had loved every second of it. "One more thing." He rummaged in his bag and pulled out a can of red spray paint. He walked over to the one large, untouched white wall, the wall Clara used to project her sketches. He shook the can, the rattling ball echoing in the destroyed room. And in large, dripping, angry letters, he wrote the one thing he knew would break her more than the art. Clara returned 15 minutes later, a bag of groceries in her lap. She was almost humming, thinking about Echo. She rolled up to her main door, saw the thin alarm wire was still perfectly in place, and smiled. She was safe. She unlocked her 3 locks, pushed the door open, and rolled inside. The smell hit her first, not clay and plaster, but the sickening chemical aerosol of spray paint. She looked up. Her world, her life, her soul was gone. It was a war zone. Sculptures were smashed, stands shattered. Her supplies, her precious, expensive tools, were a thick, toxic sludge covering the floor. Her vision tunneled. She couldn't breathe. She thought she was going to be sick. And then she saw it. On the far wall, the only clean space, the red paint still dripping. Next time it's the dog. She didn't scream. She didn't make a sound. All the air left her body, and she just sat there, a silent, broken statue in the middle of her own desecrated grave. The call came at 11:04 a.m. Alex was cleaning his rifle, an abstract-looking civilian variant he'd bought locally, a ritual of maintenance and focus. When his burner phone vibrated, he answered. "Yeah." "Alex?" The voice on the other end wasn't Clara, not the woman he'd met anyway. This voice was a hollow, dead thing, a dry whisper of air passing over vocal cords. It was the voice of someone who had seen the absolute end of their world. It's gone. That was all. My studio, it's all gone. He wrote on the wall, Alex, the dog. He wrote about the dog. The dead tone was 1,000 times more alarming than her panic had been. Panic meant fight. This was broken. "Stay there," he said, his voice dropping into that calm, flat register. "Don't touch anything. I'm coming." He was already moving, his rifle disassembled and packed, his small kit bag zipped. He was out the door of his rented motel room in 45 seconds. He arrived at her studio in 6 minutes, taking the alley route. He saw her through the open door, a solitary, still figure in her wheelchair, her back to him, facing the far wall. She was just sitting, staring. The smell of aerosol, plaster, and linseed oil hit him like a physical wall. He stepped inside, his boots crunching on the shattered remains of a plaster mold. His eyes did a single comprehensive sweep of the room. It was not vandalism. It was a psychological execution. The smashed sculptures, the shattered stands, the sludge of materials that had been her life's work. And then the wall. The bright, dripping red. Next time it's the dog. He felt his heartbeat, a single, hard, cold drum. He walked past her and knelt, his fingers lightly touching the jamb of the main door. The thin, high-tensile tripwire he had set was still perfectly intact. He looked at the fire escape window. The wire was still there. They hadn't come in the ways he'd protected. They had come in another way. His mind flashed to the lawyer. Thorne. This was not the rash, stupid anger of a rich kid. This was a planned, deliberate, strategic message. They had bypassed his security. They had escalated. They had threatened a direct, future action. His jaw tightened until his teeth ached. The system he knew was not just broken. It was actively hostile. Sergeant Davis, Marcus Thorne. They were all part of the same wall of power, and he, Alex, had just been outmaneuvered. "Okay," he said, his voice quiet. He walked over to her, crouching so she could see him without turning. "Clara, we're leaving." She didn't respond. Her eyes were unfocused, fixed on the red letters. "Clara," he said, a little firmer. "Listen to me. This room is a crime scene, but we're not calling the cops. This is my fault. I put up a defense and they got around it. That won't happen again." He touched her arm, a firm, grounding pressure. "They want you to break. We're not going to let them. Pack a bag, laptop, clothes for 3 days, your medication, nothing else. We're going." She finally turned, her eyes slowly focusing on him. They were empty. "He won," she whispered. "He took my work. He took me." He took things, Alex countered, his voice hard as stone. You are still here. Your talent is still here. But we are not safe here. They just proved that. Pack now. We have 10 minutes. The command in his voice finally pierced her shock. She nodded, a single, numb motion, and rolled toward her dresser, her wheels leaving clean tracks through the sludge of plaster. While she packed, Alex went to his rental car and retrieved a black, hardened Pelican case from the trunk. His real kit. He brought it inside. He pulled out a small magnetic puck, a GPS tracker with an audio feed. He also grabbed a high-sensitivity directional microphone. He was done with defense. He got Clara checked into a new place, an anonymous chain motel off the I-26, miles from the historic district and its web of influence. He paid cash, using a name that wasn't his. "Stay here," he told her, his gaze intense. "Keep the door locked. Do not use the hotel Wi-Fi. Do not call anyone. I will be the only person who comes to this door. I have to go get your dog." He left her there, a ghost in a beige room, and drove straight to the vet clinic. Dr. Carter was at the front desk. "I'm here for Echo," Alex said. Dr. Carter, the vet with the kind eyes, looked at Alex, really looked at him, seeing the new, cold fire in his gaze. "He's all paid for," Dr. Carter said quietly. "An anonymous benefactor, a wire transfer from a law firm." Thorne. Alex felt the muscles in his back knot. "He's still healing, but he's mobile. He needs rest." "He'll get it," Alex said. A tech brought Echo out. The dog was bandaged tightly around his torso, but his eyes were bright, and the moment he saw Alex, his tail gave a weak, happy wag. "Let's go, boy," Alex murmured, scratching his ear. Echo was his partner now. The bait. Alex did not return to Clara. He returned to the scene of the crime. He and Echo went back to the destroyed studio. The smell was overwhelming. Echo whined, sensing the violation, his nose wrinkling at the chemical stench. "Easy," Alex whispered. "We're just waiting." He knew they would be back. The message on the wall wasn't a threat. It was a promise. They thought Clara was broken and gone. They thought the dog was an easy target. But they didn't know he was still there. He needed to know when. He left Echo in the studio, the new tripwires on the doors and windows now far more sophisticated, and went hunting. It was easy to find Julian. He was exactly where a young, arrogant man would be after such a victory, the rooftop bar of the city's most expensive hotel, drinking with Mason and Kyle. They were loud, triumphant, and drunk. Alex sat in his car across the street, the directional mic in his lap, the foam earpiece secure. He just listened. He heard them bragging, reliving the destruction, laughing about the look on her face, or the look they imagined on her face. Alex's breathing remained slow, steady. He just gathered intel. Finally, after an hour of their drunken celebration, Julian raised his glass. "To a message sent," he slurred. "I'm telling you, it's done. She's gone. Thorne's guy confirmed she rolled out of her studio with a bag. Didn't even call the cops. She's terrified. She's broken." "What about that?" "That guy," Mason asked, his voice still holding a nervous edge. "The one from the park." "What about him?" Julian sneered. "He's probably with her. He's on leave. He can't do anything. He's probably 100 miles away by now, scared of getting in trouble." Julian took a long drink. "But we're not finished. That message. Next time it's the dog. Thorne called my dad. He said the vet called him again, asking about the final bill. The dog's there, alone. The girl's gone. The Marine's gone. The dog is just sitting there." Alex's blood ran cold. The phone call had been a trap. Thorne had baited the vet. He had fed Julian this information. This was a setup. Julian stood up, unsteady on his feet, his voice loud with whiskey. "She left him, just like I said she would. So, here's the plan. We go right now. We grab the mutt, we take him to the Ravenel Bridge, and we throw him off. End of story. Let's go. Alex didn't wait to hear more. He was already starting his car. They thought they were going to a vet clinic. They thought they were picking up a helpless dog. But Alex was faster. He raced back to the studio. He had maybe 15 minutes. He got inside, his movements economical and swift. He turned to Echo, who was resting by the door, alert. "Okay, boy," he whispered. "We've got company." He shut down the power to the entire studio, plunging the room into the deep urban darkness of the alley. He picked a spot, a dark corner where the shadows were deepest, and he sat, his back against the wall, his pelican case open at his feet. Echo, sensing the shift, moved silently beside him, letting out a low, almost inaudible rumble. Alex placed a calming hand on his fur. "Shh, not yet." He sat in the dark, a shadow, and he waited for the sound of the keycard in the alley service door. The trap was set. The studio was a black hole, a pocket of absolute darkness that had swallowed all light. The air was thick with the chemical stench of aerosol and the phantom smell of old clay. Alex Renner sat on the floor in the far corner, his breathing slow and rhythmic. So quiet, it was indistinguishable from the building's own faint settling sounds. He was a creature of the dark, and in this environment, he was the apex predator. He listened. He heard the distant scrape of the alley service door, the one Thorne had compromised. He heard the muffled, angry voices of 3 men in the service hallway. They were frustrated. Their trip to the vet clinic had been a failure, just as he'd known it would be. He heard the snick of a credit card sliding into the jamb of the secondary studio door, the unsecured entrance. He heard the quiet click as the latch gave way. Echo, his bandaged ribs healed just enough for him to be mobile, was secured in the small, windowless bathroom, just as Alex had planned. The dog was the bait, but he would also be the final, necessary witness. The door opened. 3 distinct shapes, blacker than the black, silhouetted themselves against the faint light of the hallway before stepping inside, plunging the room back into total darkness. "I told you he'd be here," Julian Croft's voice whispered, tight with frustration. "She left him. The coward left him." "Just find him," Mason's voice rumbled, nervous. "This place gives me the creeps." A moment later, 3 beams of light, cell phone flashlights, cut through the black. It was the mistake Alex had been counting on. They were 3 bright, bouncing targets, and they had just ruined their own night vision. "Spread out," Julian commanded. "Check the kitchen, Kyle. Mason, the stands." Kyle, the lanky one, moved first, his light beam dancing nervously over the shattered sculptures. He was jumpy, moving too quickly. He passed the dark alcove where the kitchenette was. Alex moved. He was a shadow detaching from other shadows. He didn't come from behind. He emerged from the side, stepping into Kyle's path. Kyle gasped, his flashlight beam swinging up, illuminating Alex's impassive face for a fraction of a second. It was the last thing he saw, clearly. Alex's hand, moving in a rigid, precise chop, struck the side of Kyle's neck. A brachial stun that sent a concussive shockwave through his nervous system. Kyle's phone clattered to the floor. He dropped like a marionette whose strings had been cut, not making a sound. Alex caught the phone before it went dark, pocketed it, and dragged the unconscious man behind a large, overturned workbench, securing his hands behind his back with a heavy-duty zip tie. One down. "Kyle?" Mason called out from across the room, his voice tight. "You dropped something?" He was standing among the ruined stands, his own light sweeping back and forth. "Jules, I don't—" "He's probably fine, you idiot," Julian hissed from the center of the room. "Find the dog." Mason, trying to be brave, moved forward. "Kyle, answer me." He was a bigger man, the muscle of the group, and he was trying to be threatening, but his light beam was shaking. Alex, using the broken furniture as a maze, circled around him in the dark. He made a small noise, a soft scuff of a boot on the floor 10 feet to Mason's left. Mason spun, his light catching nothing. "Who's there?" That was all the misdirection Alex needed. He closed the distance from the right. He didn't strike, he grabbed. His left hand seized Mason's right wrist, the one holding the phone, and his right hand clamped onto the elbow. He applied a simple, brutal joint lock, twisting the arm in a way it was not meant to bend. Mason roared in pain, his phone flying from his numb fingers. Alex used the man's own forward momentum to spin him, driving him face first into the floor. A knee pressed between his shoulder blades, and the fight was over before it began. "Stop, please!" Mason wheezed into the plaster-soaked floor. Another zip tie, 2 down. Now there was only Julian. He was standing alone in the vast darkness, his light beam flashing wildly. "Mason! Kyle! What's happening? This isn't funny!" He was breathing in short, panicked gasps. He was alone, and he knew it. He started backing toward the door he'd come through, and then, from the bathroom, came the sound Alex had been waiting for. A soft whine. Echo, hearing the commotion, was asking if it was time. "The dog," Julian whispered, his panic momentarily forgotten, replaced by his malice. He spun, his light fixing on the bathroom door. "There you are. I've got you now, you—" He stalked toward the door, his hand outstretched, fumbling for the knob. He was completely exposed, his back to the room. Click! The main overhead track lights flashed on, flooding the studio in a harsh, brilliant white. Julian cried out, spinning, his hand flying to his eyes, completely blind. When his vision cleared, he saw them. Mason and Kyle, side by side on the floor, awake, gagged with strips of canvas and bound, and sitting in Clara's simple wooden desk chair, bathed in the light, was Alex. He was calm, his legs crossed, holding a single looped zip tie in his hands. Julian's entire body went cold. The terror from the park returned, 1,000 times worse. You were here," he stammered. "You waited for us." "You shouldn't have come back, Julian," Alex said, his voice level. He stood up slowly. Julian, in a desperate animal panic, looked around and seized the only weapon he could find, a heavy, broken metal leg from a shattered stand. "Stay back," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "I'll kill you, I swear I will." Alex just looked at the makeshift club, then at Julian's terrified, hate-filled eyes. "Drop it!" Julian screamed, a high-pitched, wordless sound of rage and fear, and lunged, swinging the club wildly. Alex didn't even step back. He stepped into the attack, his left hand deflecting the clumsy swing while his right hand shot out, seizing Julian's wrist. He twisted. A wet, sickening snap echoed in the studio, louder than the scream that followed. Julian collapsed, clutching his shattered arm, the club clattering to the floor. "I told you to drop it," Alex said. He bound Julian's remaining good hand to his feet. 3 down. Alex walked over to his pelican case. He took out his combat knife. With a steady hand, he drew the blade across his own left forearm, a deep, precise cut that bled instantly but hit no major arteries. He let the blood drip onto the floor. Then he walked over to Julian, who was sobbing in pain, and picked up his phone. He dialed 911. His voice was calm, but now it held a new, breathless urgency. "My name is Alex Renner. I'm at 14B West Elliott Street. I'm reporting a break-in. Yes, 3 men. They attacked me. They broke in through a back door. I managed to subdue them, but I'm bleeding. One of them had a knife. Please send police. I think I need an ambulance." He read the address and hung up. The police arrived in under 3 minutes, sirens wailing. This time it wasn't Sergeant Davis. The first two through the door were uniformed, guns drawn, followed by a woman in a detective's plainclothes. This was Detective Isabella Rossi, a sharp, no-nonsense officer with dark, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She took in the scene. The three bound men, the destroyed room, and Alex leaning against the wall, his arm wrapped in a bloody rag. "What in the world happened here?" she commanded. "They broke in," Alex said, his voice strained. "It's the second time. They did this yesterday." Julian, seeing the police, found his voice. "He's lying. It's a trap. He attacked us. Call my father. Call Marcus Thorne. You'll all be fired." Detective Rossi looked from the sobbing, arrogant Julian to the terrified Mason and Kyle, to the key card that had fallen from Julian's pocket, and then to the chilling red message on the wall. She knelt by Alex. "You're military," she said, seeing his posture, not asking. Alex nodded, wincing, and showed her his active duty ID. "They assaulted me and my friend in the park 2 days ago," he said. "The police, they wouldn't help. This was their second attack. They came for the dog." Rossi's face hardened. She understood. She stood up and looked at Julian. "You're under arrest for breaking and entering, aggravated assault, and battery of a federal operative. You can call your lawyer from the holding cell." The sun was just beginning to stain the sky a pale, bruised gray when Alex finally returned to the motel. He used his key, letting himself in quietly. Clara was awake, sitting in her wheelchair, her face pale. Echo was asleep at the foot of her bed. She had been waiting all night. She saw him. His t-shirt was torn and stained. His arm was professionally bandaged. "It's over," she said. It wasn't a question. "It's over," he confirmed. "They were arrested, caught in the act with the break-in, the assault on me and the evidence in the studio. Not even their family can make this disappear." Clara just stared at his arm. They hurt you." "It's a scratch," he said, dismissing it. He sat on the edge of the other bed, the exhaustion of the last 48 hours finally settling on him. The fight was done. The silence in the small beige room was absolute. Clara rolled her chair closer. Her hand, trembling, reached out. She didn't touch his wound. She laid her small, clay-stained hand over his larger, calloused one. It was the first time she had reached for him. He turned his hand over, his fingers lacing with hers. A silent, powerful connection. "What now?" she whispered. Alex looked at their joined hands, then at her, and for the first time, she saw the coldness in his blue eyes recede, replaced by something entirely new, something like peace. "Now," he said, "we rest. If this story of courage and justice touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear this message of hope, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and uplift. We want to know your thoughts. What did you learn from Clara's resilience and Alex's quiet code of honor? Let us know in the comments below. We pray that God blesses you and your family. May He keep you safe from harm, and may He give you the strength to be a protector for others in your own life. If you believe in the power of justice and in the grace of divine protection, please write Amen in the comments below to share your faith with our community. Thank you for watching.